My name is James Threalkill. I'm a native of Nashville, Tennessee, born and raised, and I currently live in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where I moved about 5 years ago, and I'm working out of my home studio in Murfreesboro. I grew up in South Nashville in the J.C. Napier public housing community, named after a very prominent African American businessman back in the day. And my first grade teacher contacted my mother and said, Miss Threalkill, James is drawing in class all day. So there's a very good chance that he's going to be an artist. And so my mother said, well, of course, you have to do your schoolwork, but she took note of what my teacher, Miss Stinson, who's now deceased, said about me and my interest in art. It made sure that I had materials, enrolled me in art classes over at the old Children's Museum over by Howard School, and just continued to encourage me. When I turned 13, she bought me my first oil painting set. And I was the oldest of 6 kids, so that was probably money that should have gone for something else. But that demonstrated her faith in me as an artist. And so I had great teachers all through schools. I had a teacher in the third grade who was doing a school play. And she said, James, you're going to play Henry O. Tanner, the artist. And so you have to go do research and find out who he is. And when I did, I became fascinated with this black artist who specialized in realism. One of his most famous paintings is of a older black man in a cabin and a kid on his lap, and he's teaching him how to play the banjo. It's called The Banjo Lesson. Very famous painting. And he has another one called The Thankful Poor. So that influenced me in terms of style. And then Michelangelo was another influence when I saw his incredible sculpture and then being forced to paint the Sistine Chapel and how incredible that piece of work was. And so after leaving Napier School and then attending Carter Lawrence School in South Nashville and Merle School, I went to Rose Park Junior High School, where Wilbert Smith was a very disciplined art teacher. And he said, when you are painting or when you're doing lettering, don't ever do anything without using lines first. Make a line so that your work is very legible. I remember that to this day. I was a seventh grader when he told me that. And so after the eighth grade, my family moved to East Nashville and I started attending East High School. And as a ninth grader, our claim to fame was the fact that Oprah Winfrey was a senior while we were ninth graders. And so Oprah's dad was the neighborhood barber, so he cut all our hair when I had it. And just, we knew Oprah as just a regular girl in the neighborhood. Super talented, very popular. I mean, I was a hall monitor on a floor where she had a class. And every day that she came down the hallway, she had 3 or 4 people around her. She was just that talented and that popular. And so I started playing sports at East High School, was a bench warmer, and started to wonder, how am I going to go to college with 6 children in the family, and we didn't have the extra money for something like that. And so going into the 11th grade, I had this growth spurt where I went from like 5'10" to 6'4". And so I started practicing my sports skills and ended up being, by the time I was a senior, a highly recruited athlete in football, basketball, and running track. And so then I knew that my opportunity for college was going to be taken care of, but there was no doubt that I was going to be an art major. And I was that passionate about it. And so I accepted a football scholarship to Vanderbilt University, where I played wide receiver and received my Bachelor of Science degree in Fine Arts. But before I left for college, my mother said, everybody's saying there's a good chance that you're going to go pro in sports, but you have to keep in mind, what are you going to do if you get injured? So never neglect your academics and your art. And sure enough, my second year in college, I received a debilitating injury that ended my aspirations to play professional sports. But the first thing I thought about was what she said about never neglect your art. And so I just put all of my focus and energy into maintaining my interest and passion for being a creative artist. My work in the community evolved from having been given an opportunity to be a community services director and art instructor at a local community center in the Edge Hill neighborhood. The director of the center at the time, Rosetta Davis, decided we need to change the name of this center to the Edge Hill Center so that people realize that this excellence is coming out of this community. And so we set up youth clubs where kids could come off the street into the community center in a safe environment and have access to all types of resources and, of course, art materials and other things. One day I'd gone out for a meeting and I was coming back home to the center, and there was this kid sitting on the front steps of the center doing this incredible drawing on a piece of cardboard. And so naturally, as the art teacher, I'm like, man, this work is incredible. You know, who are you? I told him who I was. I said, do you have any more work you can show me? This kid went home and brought back a stack of drawings that were done on grocery bags. And he said, I have to wait till my mother goes to the grocery store to cut these bags open and use them for drawing surfaces. I said, young man, I said, I am the art teacher at this center. If you come inside this community center, you will have access to the best of art materials and other instruction to help you with your interest in art. He was a very shy, introverted kid, but by the time we had spent 2 or 3 years working together, this kid went on to be not only an excellent award-winning artist, but an award-winning debate team participant. He had done some acting, had shot some commercials where he used his art and did the narration on it. But those were the kinds of examples of scenarios where young people could be engaged and empowered to understand what their skills and successes were. And so the Tennessee Arts Commission had a grant program where we wrote a grant for a mural painting program. And what we did was took kids to downtown Nashville and out to the airport to paint all of these fabulous murals. And so the Viacom network saw our work and asked us if we would do a mural for a talk show program that they were doing. The guy who was producing the show said, this is going to be a talk show, but I don't want the typical lamp and plant in the background. So he took us to this warehouse where he had this 40-foot canvas. He said, I'd like for you and your students to paint positive and negative depictions of life in Nashville. So me and those kids hit that canvas and we painted people jogging and graduating and walking their dogs, but we also showed some scenes that were kind of negative with needles on the ground and other things of that nature. And so when the Emmy Award nominations came around, they submitted that mural into the category of set design, and me and my students won an Emmy Award for that mural. And so by then, people were taking notice of the success that we were having with those kids in the community, and it just whet my appetite for the importance of community work. And so that led to Mayor Phil Bredesen during his second term to approach me saying that he felt like he had gotten disconnected with the community during his first term. And he said, I would love for you to head up my community affairs department with the mayor's office. And so I ended up being a special assistant to the mayor for community affairs and arts. And so it was a great experience because a lot of the transformation that we see now in Nashville took place under his leadership. He looked at Second Avenue, that was kind of a ghost town at the time, and said, you know, we need to attract professional sports, the Titans, the Predators. The Wild Horse Saloon came to Second Avenue, and those warehouses started showing the potential for becoming the vibrant business district that it is now. So my service work in the community has always been a very fond memory because we impacted a lot of lives during that time. The trajectory of my art, my style and my approach to art was initially heavily influenced by the realism and the techniques of people like Henry O. Tanner, Norman Rockwell, Michelangelo. I just became fascinated with realism. And so that was my approach in trying to almost have a photorealistic type of depiction with the work that I created, and had tremendous success with that particular style. But I guess the competitive part of me, having played college sports, when I would be in my studio, I would ask myself, how do I challenge myself to take my art to another level? What can I do different to maintain freshness and uniqueness in my approach to art? And so I started using the palette knife to apply paint to the canvas, and started using non-traditional vibrant colors and metallics and other types of combinations of colors to put them in non-traditional places on the canvas. And so I started doing jazz musicians and dancers and elephants and horses and a lot of different things using that technique, which was almost three-dimensional in the texture of it. The colors were bright, and they were now making these fluorescent colors that enhanced the colors that you already had on the canvas, and then a metallic backdrop. And they just made these very vibrant creations. And so when I would do art shows, the response was overwhelming. People really took to the vibrancy of the colors, and that's the first thing they'd comment about. The colors are so fascinating. I would do outdoor art shows, and people would just be drawn to my tent because of all of that color that was on display in my booth at art shows. And so because of the reaction to it and the fun that I was having in really being able to build up on the canvas with texture and color, I've kind of stayed in that particular mode of painting because of the response and then because of the enjoyment that I have. But I also still get commissions where I have to use the brush. And going back and forth also maintains a certain level of freshness in terms of your technique, because opportunities come in a variety of either requests for subject matter or styles. And I learned that early on. After college, I had an aunt in Chicago, and I moved up there because at the time Nashville was too slow to try to be a full-time artist. And so she took me to Ebony Jet Magazine's office for an interview. And so I had this big portfolio and got on the city bus, bumping people upside the head when I got on the bus. They were probably like, who is this country bumpkin up here in this sophisticated city? But I got to Ebony Jet's magazine. The art director's name was Herbert Temple. I laid my portfolio out in front of him, and he started flipping through my work. So I'm sitting there like, can't wait for him to tell me how good my work is. And so after he looked at about 4 or 5 pieces, he said, I have a question for you. I said, yes, sir, bring it. He said, why are all your images black? And so I'm like, wait a minute. This is Ebony Jet Magazine, the most prominent African-American publication in the world, and you asked me why all my images black? So I tried to have this profound statement like, well, you know, I'm trying to represent my people and I'm proud of the image. He said, listen, son. He said, you have too much talent to limit yourself in one particular style of painting. He said, you have to demonstrate that you can paint any and everything. From a person to a landscape to a frog, you got to show that you can paint it. And he said, what that's going to do for you is broaden your client base, but also give people an idea of the tremendous versatility that you can have as an artist. And so instead of getting mad, oh man, you don't know what you're talking about, I'm out of here. You know, I said, sir, thank you for that advice. I really appreciate it. And I immediately applied it to my style. And to this day, I have commissions that range from corporations who wanted portraits of their CEO, people of all ethnicities, people who want abstract pieces, people who want still life or scenes of the sun setting over the ocean. And I always credit that back to that gentleman caring enough about what he saw in my work to say, look, you have the talent to be so much more than what you're demonstrating. And so that was a valuable lesson. And so all of those scenarios are incorporated into my approach to my art. And even though I'm having tremendous success with the palette knife style that I'm doing now, I'm still looking for ways to, you know, push the envelope further. Where can I go next with my style, my imagery, and those types of things? And that's the fun part of being an artist and being able to wake up every day and go into my studio and figure out what creative approach I'm going to take to my next project. My favorite piece of art that I've done was a piece from my trip to South Africa that I took in 1995 when I was invited by Warner Brothers Records, who had 2 producers, Gail Hamilton and Malcolm Duplessis, working with Jim Ed Norman, the president of Warner Brothers Records. They were doing a project to celebrate South Africa coming out of the apartheid regime. And so I had done a painting of Nelson Mandela when he was released. It was a photograph in USA Today where he was being released from prison, and he had his fist up when he was coming out and greeting the crowd. That led to me being invited to South Africa to do a mural project for that album project that they were developing. And so while working with students in Soweto, there was this community college where we were set up. And so I was just walking through the building. And when I walked through the building, at the end of this hallway was a young man practicing on an acoustic guitar. And he was using the sunlight from outdoors to illuminate his music sheets. And so I just very discreetly took a photograph from a distance. And when I got back to the States, I painted that picture. It was a beautiful, subtle depiction of a kid studying music. And I entered it into the Central South Art Exhibition that they used to host at the Centennial Park, Parthenon. And that piece won Best of Show. And it was so exciting to have taken an experience from my trip to South Africa, where I actually met and talked face to face with Nelson Mandela, to have an image be that successful in a show once I returned to the States. The piece was called Guitar Solitude, and that by far is my favorite piece because of all the circumstances surrounding how that piece came about. People who played an important role in my life as an artist was, of course, the first grade teacher who alerted my mom to my art potential. But my mother was my biggest fan as it relates to art. She bought me materials at an early age and then invested in an expensive oil painting set for me to be introduced to painting at age 13. And so I will always cherish what she meant to my development, because even when she recognized that I hadn't drawn in a while, she would kind of admonish me, you don't want to lose that talent, so you need to keep your art skill up. And that was very important to me as well. I had my mother's mother, my grandmother, she passed in 1966, and so when relatives from Alabama came to town for the funeral, my mother's cousin, my cousin, named Shedrick, he, after being told that I was interested in art, he said, well, man, come here, let me show you something. And so one of my uncles was asleep on the sofa. He took out a sketch pad and sketched my uncle sleep on the sofa. But he said, let me show you how to take your drawings to another level. So he turned the pencil sideways and started shading in the shadows so that it looked more realistic. And he said, that gives your drawings more depth. So he said, take the sketch pad, go upstairs, look in the mirror, and draw yourself. And I went up there and I did a self-portrait, and for the first time, I used the pencil to shade in the shadows and that kind of thing. Just elevated my art to a completely different level with that little lesson that he gave me back then. And I still tell him to this day how important that was. But along with the art teachers that I had in high school and the art teachers in college, they all taught me techniques that were important toward my total development. And so I always like to pay homage to those individuals. My sixth grade teacher at Carter Lawrence School in South Nashville, his name is Jackie Thomas. He wasn't an art teacher, but he recognized my potential and my talent. And so he always encouraged me to just work hard and to do my best. And then he would take all the guys outside on recess and play quarterback for both teams when we played football. And I tell him to this day that not only did you help my educational development, but because you could pass the ball so well, you developed my skills as a wide receiver, which ended up paying for me to go to college as a wide receiver. So those are just very special moments to be able to share with people who've crossed your path and who have helped you to develop into the individual that you are to this day. Art has been a very special part of my life. I had a skill and I was made to understand how important it was. And so I put the work in to develop it, and it has taken me all over the world, including South America, to do mural projects and other places. And so whatever your skill may be, if you put the effort and the work into it, you never know what's ahead in terms of opportunities. And so when you prepare and put in the work ethic, there are some potential opportunities that can take you places beyond your wildest dreams. So I love being an artist, and I love sharing my story with young people to inspire them to forge ahead for successful outcomes in their own lives.